Hello and welcome to the Haaretz Podcast. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer in Tel Aviv. It's hard to exaggerate the role of U.S. aid to Israel when it comes to the relationship between the two countries. America's commitment to the Jewish state's qualitative military edge against its many enemies and bipartisan support cultivated intensively by Israel supporters in the U.S. has translated into hundreds of billions of dollars over the years, making Israel the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign aid. Maintaining that flow of aid, nearly all of which is military assistance and used to purchase weaponry from the United States, has been the cornerstone of pro-Israel organizations, most prominently, of course, AIPAC, the most prominent pro-Israel lobby in Washington, D.C. So what happens when the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, says publicly, as he did in an interview this week, that Israel may no longer want or need that aid anymore?
So now in my visit with President Trump, I said, we very deeply appreciate the military aid that America has given us over the years, but here too we've come of age and we've developed incredible capacities. And in our economy, which will soon reach, certainly within a decade, it'll reach about $1 trillion. It's not a huge economy, but it's not a small economy. So I want to taper off the military aid within the next 10 years.
You want to taper it off to zero within 10 years?
Yes.
That would be a very dramatic shift.
Well, it's in the works.
What's more, Israel's leader is saying this as the country faces a possible renewed military threat. As widespread public protests rock Iran, President Donald Trump is indicating that the U.S. could intervene. And conventional wisdom has it that if Iran and the U.S. conflict, Israel is likely to find itself a target of retaliation. I'm speaking on the podcast with Haaretz senior defense analyst Amos Harel about what the end of U.S. military aid would really mean for Israel's security and future, and to discuss the unfolding situation in Iran. But first, here with me to talk about the winds of change blowing when it comes to U.S. aid to Israel is Haaretz Washington, D.C. correspondent Ben Samuels, who is, for a change, here with me in person in the studio, having recently landed for a visit instead of, as usual, on the line long distance. Those conversations are coming up.
I'm Esther Solomon, Editor-in-Chief of Haaretz English. Around the world, the fight is on to preserve critical and independent media. Haaretz, Israel's oldest newspaper, upholds its long tradition of accurate, committed, and incisive journalism, refusing to bend its reporting to pressure from any government or leader. A digital subscription to Haaretz gives you up-to-the-minute news and analysis in English from journalists who live Israel's reality and are committed to covering the Middle East and its global repercussions. At the same time, your subscription supports the cause of a free press that holds the powerful to account in Israel and around the world. I invite you to become a subscriber to Haaretz now. Just go to Haaretz.com and use the code Haaretz10, that's Haaretz with the number 10, for 10% off an annual subscription.
Ben Samuels, it's great to have you live and in person in Tel Aviv.
Great to be with you.
Give us your read on what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is saying about American aid after his visit to the White House with Donald Trump, and put it in the context of what he's said before. Basically, were you surprised by this 10-year timeline?
You know, it's interesting because I think there's a tendency to see Benjamin Netanyahu calling for an end to U.S. military aid to Israel and think that there was some invasion of the body snatchers thing that happened where all of a sudden he's a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. That is not what this is. You know, him and Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator who said that he was also in favor of expediting the phasing out of U.S. military assistance to Israel, this isn't coming from a place where they want to formally rethink the U.S.-Israel geopolitical strategic relationship, and it doesn't impact Israel's standing as a crucial ally in the Middle East. If anything, this is just Netanyahu being a savvy political reader of the landscape, both of what is currently happening on the ground in Washington with both political parties, but also what is going to be happening in the next 12 to 24 months when the 10-year, $38 billion memorandum of understanding that stipulates how the United States gives military assistance to Israel, that is set to expire in 2028. Donald Trump is infamously not a fan of foreign military assistance. In fact, one of the first things that he ever said when he was running for president was telling the 2016 AIPAC policy conference that he was against foreign aid. So not only that, but Trump is also very much right now in this moment where he is particularly focused on military spending and how that fits into his greater budget considerations. So these negotiations are going to happen where Trump is really looking at the landscape of what is happening both within America and within his own base, but also how he wants to leave the world, because assuming that he doesn't run for president again in 2028, which he is not constitutionally empowered to do, he is going to try leaving some sort of lasting legacy. So Netanyahu, knowing that these are Trump's considerations, is really trying to set the ground for what the conversation around continued U.S. assistance to Israel may look like.
Is he just getting out in front of it, that he thinks that it's going to be taken away? So let's tell everybody, look at us. We're so economically strong. We don't need the aid anymore. Is that the strategy? Does he really believe that Israel doesn't need the military aid, or you just don't think he believes it's really going to happen and it's politically wise to say we don't need it?
I think it's a lot of proactive face saving from Netanyahu. I think he understands that if he was just trying to go to Trump hat in hand, being like, hey, we need another 10 to 20 year memorandum of understanding where you just give us billions and billions of dollars in weapons and weapon sales. You know, I should also note what the military sales actually look like. So there's two sort of components to it. One is the kind of sales where the United States acts as the intermediary between American companies selling weapons to the Israeli military.
Isn't that where the vast majority of aid goes? Isn't Israel required sort of contractually from the, I believe it's $3.8 billion of aid, needs to spend a huge proportion of it, if not all, by buying weapons from American companies?
A huge proportion of it. But within the structure of the deal, they are also allowed to spend a certain amount of it directly through private American military contractors. Beyond that, as their status as a non-major NATO ally, you know, they are also entitled to excessive, I think the official term is excessive military articles or whatever it may be. But basically, they're allowed to have the surplus of American weapons if they needed to. So there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat when it comes to how do we get weapons from America. So when Netanyahu says, yeah, we're going to phase it out and be completely independent, it's very vague. It's very, what I would assume is intentionally not specific on what that phasing out is actually going to look like. And it's just completely disconnected from the fact that Israel will be reliant on America. You know, just because it doesn't look like the way it looked like when the Obama administration and Netanyahu negotiated, when Netanyahu negotiated a memorandum of understanding with the Clinton administration, when George Bush negotiated one with Ehud Olmert, it doesn't mean that there isn't going to be a significant reliance there. And, you know, this kind of fits in with Netanyahu's whole talking point over the past few months, where he wants to turn Israel into some sort of self-sufficient super Sparta because of its growing diplomatic isolation on the world stage. This all kind of fits in that. It's just sort of disconnected from the reality where the U.S. and Israel have a very symbiotic relationship. And if Iran strikes Israel, for example, or if Israel finds itself in another regional war with some Iranian proxy, Israel is going to rely on the United States for its defense, and it is going to rely on the United States for some sort of supplemental assistance, if you will.
I mean, we are speaking about this at a moment when Israel is facing, you know, a direct immediate threat. They say that the IDF is on high alert because we have these widespread, really amazing protests going on in Iran. We have President Trump saber rattling and you know, threatening to intervene, and the knowledge that if Iran decides to respond to some theoretical American intervention, that Israel could be the target. So we're talking about sort of reduced American support militarily to Israel at a time when Israel may be threatened militarily because of the United States.
Right. And that's the thing. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in the short term. It's not going to happen in the immediate term. Maybe way down the line, there will be some sort of different kind of relationship. But the idea that the United States, to put it one way, wouldn't be on the hook for defending Israel is just completely disconnected from how it operates in the world, how it operates in the Middle East theater, how it relates to other great powers of the world, and how that reflects on the United States. So, just this whole, people getting up in arms about Israel and the United States, like fundamentally altering their relationship overnight, it is just simply not going to happen.
Talk about this memorandum of understanding. I think a lot of people don't really know what it is. Tell us what it contains and what it means if it's not renewed.
So since Israel's founding in 1948, United States assistance has kind of ebbed and flowed between military assistance and economic assistance. Over the 60s and the 60s through the 80s, let's say, that really started taking a shift away from the economic model, more toward the military model. In the past few decades, the economic assistance has completely amounted to zero, and all foreign assistance has been in the form of military aid.
And as we said, military aid mostly spent in the United States.
Yeah, so there have been 3 memorandums of understandings. It used to be grants versus bonds. What the memorandum of understanding does is that it specifically spells out how the money is going to be spent, what is allocated for X amount of weapons purchased through this forum and another amount of weapons purchased through another forum. So there have been 3 in the history of the U.S.-Israel relationship. The first one was negotiated between the Clinton administration and then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government. The second one was negotiated between Ehud Olmert and the Bush administration. And then the third one was negotiated between the Obama administration and Prime Minister Netanyahu. So this number has gone up exponentially over the course of the 3 memorandums of understandings. I think off the top of my head, the Clinton one was about $20 billion, and then the Bush one was 30, and then the most recent one was 38 billion. These were negotiated in a reality that just does not exist anymore. Military assistance from the United States to Israel has become one of the most convenient punching bags for critics of the U.S.-Israel relationship.
On both sides of the aisle.
Both sides. So with Democrats, they have been increasing, over the past 2 years, have been increasingly irate about Israel not abiding by U.S. law, where as recipients of military assistance, there are a set of laws that dictate whether or not they can be used to violate certain standards of international law. Israel has done that, according to researchers, according to video that has come out, according to claims from victims. The United States government themselves have investigated whether or not these have actually been committed, but it has never gotten to the point where the U.S. government has abided by its own requirements toward U.S. military assistance and suspended weapons. So Democrats have been, especially over the course of the Gaza war, have been increasingly using this as their one thing, like, okay, if we want to fundamentally alter how this relationship is empowering Israel to allegedly commit human rights violations, this is where we go.
And also for the whataboutism, when people say, well, why don't you care about this country or that country or the other country violating human rights or, committing atrocities in their countries, the argument always goes back, well, those countries aren't the recipient of so much foreign aid from the United States.
So much foreign aid, more than most countries. I think it's, the largest country, you could even say, but also that are receiving so many weapons through so many different little carve-outs and specifications of how the law works. But that's just coming from the Democratic side. What's coming from the Republican side is, how is it America first to be so entrenched in a foreign military's own adventurism, especially when that is going to cause U.S. taxpayers to send their own money to it and potentially affect U.S. interest on the ground. So it's coming from both sides.
And the argument that, we have common interests and Israel, by outsourcing, the U.S. is saving money. None of those arguments hold water anymore?
They still hold water, but the camp for who it holds water is increasingly shrinking. And you're seeing both Republicans and Democrats just increasingly believe on both sides, for whatever their own motivations are, that the status quo just cannot hold any longer. And this is going to be particularly relevant over the next few months, over the midterm elections, but especially with the 2028 primaries, because there's a very real scenario where you will have a Democratic presidential candidate and a Republican presidential candidate who are both saying we need to fundamentally rethink how the United States provides military assistance to Israel. So just to kind of go back to the beginning, Netanyahu understands that this is the reality of what's happening in Washington. He can't just say military aid is a sacred cow that we're not going to slaughter. Like, it won't work. It won't work. So he has to proactively think of something to proactively appease certain critics, or how to think creatively about how he can still empower Israel and still, create this sort of U.S.-Israel relationship that is very much a business transactional relationship without making it look like he is just continuously going to America hat in hand.
I keep thinking this is AIPAC's worst nightmare. So much. I mean, there's AIPAC, but really a whole pro-Israel community for decades, for so much of the history of the American Jewish community, has focused on, getting American support for Israel, first both economic and military, and now focused on the military. Is this going to be some sort of an earthquake in the organized American Jewish community or the pro-Israel community? I mean, theoretically, if what Netanyahu says would happen, it would be tapered down to nothing. How do you see this changing the attitude of American Jews, of American Jewish organizations towards the relationship with Israel?
I mean, it would really require, the message has been coming from Netanyahu, and it has been echoed by Lindsey Graham.
What exactly did Lindsey Graham say?
Lindsey Graham said that he completely supports an American ally, becoming self-sufficient, standing on its own 2 feet. It's in America's best interest. It's in Israel's best interest. He's going to find a way to appeal to both Trump and Netanyahu to make this happen and to make it happen quickly.
Sooner than 10 years.
I mean, it's all hypothetical at this point. Bibi can say 10 years. Lindsey Graham can say 5 years. I can say 100 years. It just has as much realism no matter who says it. But the thing is, as these sort of concentric circles keep going out, and here's the message from Netanyahu, then Lindsey Graham's one step out, and then AIPAC is a step out after that, the message becomes a little watered down and it becomes a little diluted. And how are people like supporters of AIPAC, who have treated military aid as this sacrosanct thing that if you dare question it, then you are not only in support of endangering Israeli lives, but it makes you borderline anti-Semitic. How are they going to just turn around and flip the script and be like, you know what? You're right. We don't need U.S. military assistance to Israel. We can support Israel becoming this super Sparta that Netanyahu is talking about.
And what will their role be, though?
It's a very fine line that they're going to have to learn how to navigate in real time if things trend the way that Netanyahu is setting the path to trend. And there's been a lot of cognitive dissonance when it comes from this community for years, when it comes to Trump, when it comes to Republicans, when it comes to Democrats even, where they have just prioritized support for Israel above anything else. And when how you have defined support for Israel seemingly is changing overnight, it's going to be really interesting to see how they kind of toe that line.
To me, it sounds like a full-blown potential identity crisis. What will being a supporter of Israel in the United States, what form will it take if it doesn't take the form of lobbying for aid to Israel?
Yeah, and I mean, being a supporter of Israel has only become increasingly alienating for many people already. It's already become the sort of thing where it has created this sort of kind of us against the world mentality that has manifested in so many ways. When that is kind of turned inward, it's going to be really interesting to see what that actually looks like.
And this is before we've seen any kind of long-term plan for Gaza, play out. Trump is investing supposedly in this plan. We don't see it really happening right now. And if that falls apart, it could really be a big problem.
So he's going to announce the Board of Peace in the coming days. They're going to announce the establishment of a Palestinian technocratic government to help work with the board and kind of manage the day-to-day soon after that. But even with these sort of initial steps being taken, we are still very much at that fork in the road in the grand scheme of things of what is this going to look like? And if the one constant of U.S. military assistance to Israel, if that is taken out of the equation.
Yeah. What leverage is there for Israel to make security compromises in order to make this Gaza plan work?
Yeah, it only makes the future more unstable, and it only makes these sort of talking points, even more frivolous than they already are. So it's just going to be so fascinating to see how this plays out in the midterms over the next year, because that is really going to be the first case study to see just how alienating organizations like AIPAC have become to the electorate. Just the other day in California, in the race to succeed Nancy Pelosi in the Democratic Party, there was a town hall event, and the three candidates that were running were asked if Israel committed genocide. Two of the candidates said yes. The front runner, Scott Weiner, he said, I don't know. And he got dragged over the coals for it. And he ended up posting a video apologizing, saying that, yes, Israel is committing genocide. And, this is like the normie mainstream candidate. This isn't, Zoran Mamdani. It's Scott Weiner, And if this is the talking point coming from the left of center Democrat, it just, who knows what it's going to look like as the ball keeps rolling.
Well, Ben, we are going to rely on your wonderful dispatches from Washington to show us what it's going to look like moving forward towards the midterms. You have your work cut out for you. It's going to be a different kind of campaign and a different kind of midterm election. And that's even with not knowing what's going to play out in Iran in the next days and weeks. Ben Samuels, thank you so much for coming and joining us.
Great to be with you.
Coming up, Haaretz senior defense analyst Amos Harel on what the end of U.S. military aid would mean for the IDF, and the latest on how Israeli defense and political leadership views the unfolding developments in Iran. Amos Harel, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Alison. Thanks for inviting me.
Amos, let's assume for a moment that Netanyahu meant what he said about Israel being such an economic powerhouse that it can forego U.S. military aid completely, and he wants to taper it off in the next 10 years. What would that really mean for the IDF, for Israel's security?
In the long run, it could be problematic. I don't think Netanyahu had much choice. I think this is something that Trump expected him to do. The president was quite vocal about his intentions ever since he invited Netanyahu to the White House back in February of last year. So it was bound to happen, and it was better for Netanyahu to appear as if he's the one who initiated it. Once this happens, we were worried about QME, qualitative military edge, just a while ago. This would mean that Israel would have less buying power when it comes to American weapons. There's not much choice since Trump is in charge, and since he's not fond of the idea of American taxpayers' money used in that way. But it would mean, A, that Israel would have less money to spend, and B, that it will take more from the state budget in order to invest in security issues at the expense of such matters as education, the medical system, the well-being of Israeli citizens. There's not much choice, but this is where we're heading. Right now, Netanyahu sort of wraps it up with all kinds of announcements about our capabilities, economic, financial capabilities, military capabilities, and so on. But I don't think that anybody needs to be convinced that we were better off with the previous arrangement. It's no longer in the cards, unfortunately.
Almost given that, do you think Netanyahu really meant what he said, or is he just kicking the can down the road?
Probably both things are true. If he has a chance, he'll try to persuade Trump or whoever comes after Trump to continue with the regular plan. If there's no other alternative, then what can he do? Then he needs to announce it, and he needs to spin it in a way which won't appear as if Israel's too weak to affect its own destiny over such things. But we've been saying that for a long time. This is Trump's world. We only live in it. And Netanyahu has to get along somehow. He's done rather well for himself for the time being. Let's look at the summit at Mar-a-Lago, 2 weeks ago? There were a lot of assessments in the Israeli press that this time Trump is really going to give it to him. This wasn't the case. Trump was pro-Bibi, more or less hugged him, and we saw, and we will see this used at the Likud campaign within a few months. And yet there are limits to Trump's friendship, and when it comes to money, it's quite clear what he thinks.
Turning to our world under Trump and the relationship between the two leaders at the moment, it's been observed that while Trump has been saber-rattling, threatening to intervene in Iran, Netanyahu, in his Economist interview, seemed more low-key about the Iran protests and whether intervention by the United States should happen. What's behind that? It seems unusual for the Israeli prime minister to downplay intervention in Iran and the U.S. president to be talking it up.
I think Netanyahu understands the situation perfectly well. There's blood in the water, and it could be the mullah's blood. It could be, there's a possibility that what we're seeing right now may turn into the end of the regime. And if that's the case, this is something that Netanyahu has preached about for, close to 30 years. He doesn't want to spoil that with unfortunate statements at this volatile moment. This is why he also told most Israeli ministers to shut up and not to address the issue at all. I assume that behind the scenes, and Netanyahu and Trump are more or less coordinated, and that Trump is listening to Netanyahu over this matter. But if Netanyahu wants to reach the end goal, which is the demise of the regime, then the best thing for him to do would be to avoid any kind of accidents on the way there. The best thing that could happen would be a regime change through the will of the Iranian people without direct Israeli involvement.
There's been a lot of reporting in the media about Israel being on high alert now because of Iran, meaning that either the U.S. could do something and Iran could retaliate against Israel, or perhaps, you talk about blood in the water, Israel taking advantage of a weak moment in Iran and intervening, which also would trigger retaliation. What is the likelihood, in your opinion, of a renewed conflict after the 12-day war between Israel and Iran?
So I think that I don't see a scenario in which Israel attacks first, in which there's an Israeli preemptive strike right now. It's about America and Iran. And if the Americans decide to actually hit Iranian targets that are connected to the regime, then this might evolve into something that might affect Israel as well. There could be retaliation from Iran. The regime, with its back against the wall, could decide to try and involve Israel in this in order to make it a sort of a bigger mess and hope to somehow survive by this. I can't rule this out completely, but I think right now this is about Iran, and it's about America and Iran and Trump's decision whether to actually take action. I think Israel, for the time being, if it manages to stay on the sidelines, this is preferable for Israel. I don't know what this would lead to. We've seen so many surprises during the last 26 or 27 months, but it's quite amazing to think of this. Going back to October 7th, the Hamas decision to strike at Israel, this masterstroke by Sinwar and death, what it led to, on top of the disaster for the Palestinian people in Gaza, is a chain of events that nobody could have foreseen, including a sort of a domino theory, a collapse of the Iranian axis. We've seen Hezbollah defeated and its leadership destroyed, killed by Israel. We've seen the collapse of the Syrian regime. Assad has been replaced by Ashara and by a more Western-friendly regime. And now there's a possibility of the collapse of the Iranian leadership itself, the Iranian regime. If this happens, this is something that nobody, I think, had in their cards even as this year began. I think we're not there yet. I think some are celebrating too early. There are some of the reports I see, some of the analysts at the TV studios and so on, act as if it's a done deal. I wouldn't underestimate the regime's capabilities, not their cruelty, not their sophistication, not their willingness to act by any means necessary in order to stay in power. But it is the worst we've seen for the regime probably since '79. This is the worst we've had. This is more problematic for them than 2022, the hijab revolt, or 2009, what was known then as the Green Revolution. And part of the difference is not only the dire economic circumstances, but also the fact that this time there's a president in the White House who's actually, we don't know yet if he's willing to put his money or his bombs where his mouth is, but he is fully behind the attempt for a revolution, which is much more than President Obama did in 2009.
Well, Amos, we'll keep watching and waiting. Some of us will go clear out our bomb shelters and our safe rooms just in case. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and we'll keep reading your analyses in Haaretz.com to keep on top of what's happening.
Thank you, Alison. Good speaking to you.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Podcast. Thanks to my guests, Ben Samuels and Amos Harel, and to producer and editor, Adi Shacham. If you want to continue to listen to the podcast and make sure you don't miss an episode, please subscribe to us on Apple or on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And please, if you are so inclined, leave us a 5-star rating so more people can find us. And to keep up with all the latest news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and to follow Haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom from Tel Aviv.